Welcome into American Joyride. We have a very special episode today with Lindsay Bruce. He is a former SAS operator. He is also the first ever SAS member to be on the show. I could not be more honored and excited to have him here. Lindsay, thank you very much.
Pleasure to be on here with you, David.
As viewers of the show know, this is a show that mostly focuses on the tip of the spear, special operations, tier one elements. We've only had one other foreigner, non-American, a Canadian JTF2 operator. Now we finally have someone from across the pond, from England, a country we respect and is a great American ally, maybe America's greatest ally. But before we get into all of that, I'm kind of curious, how did you find yourself as a young man getting into the military over in the UK?
My family, I have a very strong military background with my family. So my dad was like the first one to join, but my dad actually came from one of the islands. So I always remember like when my dad first left the Isle of Skye, which is in the Hebrides in northwest Scotland. He left there to go to Glasgow when he was about 15 years old. And after 3 or 4 years of bumming around job to job, getting into gangs and probably not going anywhere in life, he decided to go into the army careers office one day, and he just got talked into joining the infantry, which is where it all started really, because his two brothers ended up joining as well, and that was later on. And then my oldest brother joined, and I've got two older brothers, so they both joined, but they were like 7 and 9 years older than me respectively. And so I guess it just felt like a natural progression. It was almost like, it was almost like a conditioning because my upbringing was very military-esque with my dad being very militant with my older brothers. Not so much with me though. And that's where the link could have been broken, I think. I wasn't really, and I've spoken about this in other podcasts as well. It wasn't necessarily as natural for me to join as much as it was my older brothers because I mean they had more of my dad when they were kids because they were a lot older than me. So they had been exposed to that military sort of nature of my dad that I hadn't really been as much as them. So I came along a lot later. I was a bit of an accident. I was a late on summer of '76 conception, the hottest summer recorded in the UK for a long time. So, put two and two together. So I was a summer '76 conception baby, bit of an accident. So I guess when I was coming through adolescence, I guess that I was more of a mummy's boy. I was more like my mum protected me, and I guess she saw my brothers going towards the military and following my dad's footsteps. And I don't think she wanted me to follow them. She used to say things to me like, "You're not going to leave. You're not going to leave me, are you?" I'd be like, "No, no, I'm going to stay with you, mum." So I was a bit of a mummy's boy. But what came about from that was I think there was a bit of resentment from my dad. I mean, I loved my dad and we got on really well. We had a very close bond, but I always sensed a bit of I wasn't quite measuring up to the same as my older brothers. They were natural, always going to join the army type of boys. And I guess I always felt I was different. So from a young age, I had various aspirations to do different things, uh, be it sports or art or something else. But I never really felt like I was going to follow the footsteps from a very young age. That sort of came out around later. So you know the how they say when a small child is 5, 6 years old, they think that anything's possible. So you ask them what they want to be, and they'll say, "I want to be a superhero. I want to be an astronaut." And then a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, that might be a soccer player or a wrestler or something. But then you get to 16, 17, you want to go out, you want to party, you want money. So it gets to the point where you go, I just need some money. I just want to live. I just want to live my life. So I guess when I got to about 16 years old, I was in like a dead end job. I was like an engineer, like a welder. I was like an apprentice welder. It's like a college thing, but you can get placed to like an engineering company, and I liked it. But I remember there was one afternoon that I went to the local pub, and all the older guys would buy me alcohol, And I remember looking around and just thinking to myself, you had that sort of like forward projection, thinking to myself, 10 years, 15 years from now, this is me. This is how my life looks. And no offense to them guys, great guys, but I just thought, I can't do that. And because I left school with no qualifications, I left school at 15, didn't sit any exams. I flunked out of school, and I didn't really have many options. Growing up in a small town in northwest Scotland, there wasn't that many career options, especially for someone like me who was through the school system eventually thought I was kind of stupid or completely non-academic. So there's nothing I could do in that field. So I had to be practical. And I suppose the other thing I thought about was the army. I loved being fit. I loved keeping fit. I had an interest in the army, but I wasn't necessarily obsessed with it. But then I got into this frame of mind where I thought, well, it's something rather than bumming around here. So that's really where it started. But I always had this real itch that there was something else that I know I should be doing, but the army was like then the natural progression. So that continued obviously for like 11, 12 years of my life. So that's how it all started, really.
When you joined the English military, or is it technically, what's it technically called? Is it the UK military, the British military,
The Scottish military.
the Scottish
So
military?
yeah, it's the British Army, but you know what we're like. We've got a very divided sort of, not literally, but I mean we're all in the British Army, but the Scottish regiments are we're always separate and on their own in their own right. So the
Gotcha.
infantry.
So you
So I
joined
joined the infantry. Yeah.
the infantry. So was there, when you get to the infantry, are you thinking already, I want to go to the SAS? Did you even know what the SAS was at that point in time?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was well schooled in the military side of things because I grew up with it.
Right.
And I guess although it didn't feel abnormal to me, I just didn't really think that it was my only option or something that I was definitely going to do. So that's going back to about my brothers. They were always going to join the army. That was all they wanted to do. For me, I didn't necessarily have all my eggs in one basket. And so when I eventually did do that, then my mind, I kind of turned the dials a little bit because I found out that when I did join the military, I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. And also, I was very good at it. And finally, for me, it was like, well, I went through school and was subconsciously conditioned to believe that I wasn't really good at anything apart from art. I was good at art in school. That was it. I was good at making stuff out of wood and metal and paint and drawing and all that. But I didn't really think I could do anything with any of that. And so when I then joined the army, and I was, very fit, physically fit, and I was coming first in all the tests, and I just took to it really well, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the camaraderie more than anything. It was just like being around guys my age and maybe a bit older, and we had such a good laugh. It was such a good time, and everything was done for you as far as logistics are concerned. You got paid at the end of the month. You got a bed to sleep in. You had a roof over your head. You were fed 3 meals a day. You had social time. You had a lot of security and safety and certainty as a result of that. So for a young boy or a young man, just through adolescence and getting into adulthood, it was a nice place to be. So when it comes to the whole SAS thing and did I know what it was, I was very aware of it, and I was obsessed with this movie. I was obsessed with a movie called Who Dares Wins. Lewis Collins. It's a classic movie. It was like kind of around the time. I think it was made not long after the Iranian embassy siege. So it was loosely the framework was loosely kind of based on something similar, but it was a bunch of people that took over the American embassy, and there was a siege, and then obviously the SS and did a rescue mission. Um, and I remember being obsessed with that film because there's one particular scene for anyone who's seen that movie. There's an unforgettable scene where they're running through the American embassy, and Lewis Collins is like he's in there as an agent, and he's undercover, and so and he's actually a retired SAS guy. He was kicked out of the SAS, but he ends up in with this. He ends up gathering intelligence and getting in with this woman who's one of the heads of this organization. And there's a part in the movie where the SAS come in and they storm the embassy, and he links up with him, and he's just got like a white shirt with an open collar, and he's a real handsome bloke, and he's like a real cool guy, you know. He died a few years ago, unfortunately, but he'd have been an amazing James Bond, by the way. That I always thought he should have been James Bond, but regardless, that's another story for another day. There's a part in it where they're like on V formation, running down the corridor of the embassy, and he's point man, and he's got this white shirt with the open collar and a pair of black trousers on, and he's running with this machine gun, and all the SAS guys in black and respirators are behind him in arrow formation. It's just like the coolest thing ever, and the music's really cool. And if you've ever seen that movie as a young kid, that was like, I want to be that. That's what I want to do. So I guess when I joined the army, um, you're asked about all these things. You're given information on what all the other regiments are, how the military works as a whole organization. And I remember being week one in basic training, and the platoon commander said, "Does anyone know what this cap badge means?" And it was a picture of the winged dagger, "Who dares wins." And I put my hand up and says the SAS, and he says, "Is anyone here any aspirations to ever join this organization?" And me and one other put our hands up, me and one of my friends, and he ended up leaving the army, and I ended up joining about 5 years later. So it did actually. I kind of manifested that.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
And to a reference point, I don't know if you're familiar. The story you just told is very interesting because there's a movie a lot of American tier one guys will talk about. It's called Red Dawn. It's from the
yeah.
1980s. And I have
Dude.
had so many guys that were either
Mhm.
on SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force. They said when I was a kid, I was, maybe they were like 10, 12, whatever. They're like, the first time I saw that movie, all I ever wanted to do after that was run around and
Yeah,
shoot communists in the mountains. It's like they
yeah.
universally love that movie, which it's interesting because you kind of have roots to a movie of your own.
It is. It's a great movie. I suppose it's a transatlantic thing, right? We could relate to the British movie rather than something American because, in the UK, you're a very small island, and I guess that there's not as much association with what's going on across the pond. So American movies are very Hollywood, and although Who Dares Wins was still very far fetched, it was because it was a British made film, because it was probably a bit more resonance to us guys growing up there.
So when you make the decision that you're going to attempt SAS selection, is it something where they come to you and they're like, "Hey, we think you could potentially be good fit here," or do you have to initiate that process of trying to make that? How's that work?
They don't come to anyone. I mean, they've never had a although recruitment is fairly sparse, excuse me, but they don't headhunt anyone. It doesn't happen. Uh, because it's a volunteer, you've got to do it as a volunteer. And so I mean they will do like recruitment presentations. So they have a team that goes to. I've actually done this myself. I did it with it was quite one of the coolest things I ever did actually was after I had been in the SAS for probably a couple of years. I went back to my old unit, and delivered a presentation on selection process on the SAS, in an effort to try and recruit other guys to come forward, because it's one of those things. It's like the big scary monster in the closet. No one wants to look in there. It's the fear of failure that gets people. So when it comes to that mystique around the SAS, that's it's like a double-edged sword, really, because they don't overtly say, "Come and join us. This is great, and everyone can have a go." They don't really want to be asking us, and I kind of get that. I kind of caught that from there and into what I do now. I've always been very kind of. I'm not blasé about asking people to come on my coaching program, but then that's kind of it kind of it doesn't really serve my bigger purpose staying like that, because I want to help as many people as possible. And so the mystique's kind of cool, but it's double edged because people sometimes think it's not for them. So anyway, I volunteered for it because I just thought, I've always had this mindset, and I've always had this real hunger for doing things that no one else has done or people don't normally do. I like to be the guy who does something that not a lot of people are doing. I like to challenge myself. It's just all about a personal challenge, and maybe I could do that. You know, why not me? What if I could be the one to do that? So that's always been a mindset of mine. So when it came to going forward for the SAS, I didn't tell anybody at first. I just did it. I applied, and I wanted to keep it to myself. And I just applied for the joining instructions for the selection course. And I remember I was actually out in Kosovo at the time in 1999, and we were in a place called Podievo, and I never get any mail. No one sent me mail, so I got this letter through the door one day, and it was a brown envelope. And I always remember the day I opened this envelope, and it was my joining instructions for my pre-selection course. And I always remember that feeling that I took the paper from the envelope, and there was two winged daggers on the top of the paper, the headed paper, and I was just like, just the feeling I got from that was kind of like this is now real. It's like this is a letter to me with this insignia on it, and it felt really special at the time because I was the first one to go for it in a long time, and the first one to ever pass since like the 1970s.
Okay, hold on. I got to ask about this. When you say the first one to pass since the 1970s, do you mean from the unit you were currently in?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
yeah. Not obviously there'd be no regiment, but
Yeah.
a bunch of old guys from the 60s. But um, yeah, so the last guy who had joined the SAS before me was actually my first ever commanding officer when I joined the infantry. When I joined, so the unit I joined was called the Royal Highland Fusiliers. It was a Scottish infantry battalion, and no one was in the SAS from there. And one guy had been, and that was the commanding officer. You know, the guy who was in charge of the whole unit, and he had joined in the 70s. Um, and no one else had managed to get in since then. So you can imagine it's a bit like, you know, sometimes others have got to succeed before other people will believe it's possible. Otherwise, if the opposite happens and people go forward and people fail, it kind of demoralizes future generations and just makes people think that what's the point in even trying because he didn't get in and he's better than me in my mind. So why would they take me? So it was a big step, but then I suppose it was such a big step that there wasn't really any pressure. You could see it in two ways. It was a double-sided coin. In one hand, there's lots of pressure because it's a big step, and you're leaving yourself open to criticism if you don't get in. The told you so. People will be the first to say, "Yeah, well, you know, I knew you were too young, or you were above your station, or you were out of your depth." And then in the flip side of that, there was no pressure at all because I thought, well, no one else is doing it. I don't really have anyone to compare against. It's not like I'm not doing what other people have done. I would be the first. So if I don't get in, then I'm just another one of the people that didn't get in. But if I do get in, then that's quite going to be pretty special. So that's what kept me motivated.
I love that. I love the mindset of that. But on the point of failure, you're talking about the fear of failure, maybe the scary monster in the closet. People don't want to open it up and look. Was there a moment when you were going through that selection where you thought to yourself, man, maybe I'm not really cut out for this? And if that did happen, how did you manage to push through it?
Yeah, lots of times. I mean, I suppose the 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 most obvious example of that I can think of as a memory was when we did the jungle training phase. So you go out to Brunei and you. Excuse my Siri's just gone off there. Sorry,
No, it's fine.
must have been something. Must have been something I said that triggered it. Anyway, so when we go out to Brunei and do the jungle training, there's a lot of pressure on. It's probably the time where I think I was under the most pressure because everyone's watching you all the time. Everything you do, everyone's watching you, and it does get the pressure does get to you, and you do question yourself. So it could be how long you let something stay in your head, and it's a mind game because if and they do this on purpose. They do this because they want to see how you'll handle it. Will you fold under pressure? Because if you fold under pressure on a training course, are you going to fold under pressure when the shit hits the fan in operations? And so it's a very testing environment, and that's what gets to a lot of people. A lot of people they fail themselves, you know. And I say this all the time. And this is something that if there's someone watching this now that is thinking maybe I should try SAS selection, then I would remember this is that they don't actually fail that many people. people seem to think there's just misconception of you get to the end and they fail loads of people. If you get to the very end, you pass. Not that many people get to the very end of selection, and then in fact, no one I've ever known has got to the very end and failed. You'll be gone before that point. But there's a pivotal point right in the middle, which is after the jungle phase, you're then midway through the course. So it's a 6-month course. End of the jungle phase, you're 3 months in. But that is really from that point on, you've got like they call them the hardcore element. So you've got the hardcore element that is left to do the rest of the course, and nothing else is quite as hard as the jungle. And so you've gotten through the worst or the hardest part. But I remember when we did the jungle phase, they don't tell you if you've passed. So you've got this huge waiting game. So you finish your training in the jungle, you get to the end of the exercise, you come out of the jungle, you de-rig all your kit, you have a celebratory sort of we've finished night, we call it the smoker, which is like having a few beers and steaks and all that. And no one knows if they've passed. And there were some guys on my course that were like, oh yeah, I spoke to one of the DS last night, one of the staff. He gave me the wink and the nod, and he says, "Don't worry, So some guys were getting this nod, and I was like, I didn't get a nod. No one winked at me, no one nodded at me. I don't know. I'm clueless, I don't know if I have passed. And so you then have the long haul flight all the way back to the UK, and I remember sat in the plane just in my own head so much, and I was reliving all the moments of all the little things that had happened, good, bad, and ugly. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure if I've really passed this or not. I knew I hadn't done anything bad. I knew I'd done pretty well, but you can never be sure. And because I was so young, I thought maybe they're going to tell me that I'm just too young, or because I'd heard that before as well. They'd said to some people in the past that you're too young, go away and come back in 3 years' time. And that had happened. So I thought maybe I'm one of those guys. Anyway, got back to Hereford, and you then have a weekend away, and you come back, and that's sorry, before you go away for the weekend, it is before you depart for the weekend, you get told, and you get put in this big room. Everyone goes in the same room. It's like a big cinema, training room, and the chief instructor comes in and he says, the following names, go and see the training officer. And my surname begins with B, so my surname is Bruce. So I was always quite early in the nominal roll, so they did it alphabetical order. And so they started reeling off these names. And as I was sat there, they got past B, they went on to C, D, and some people started, standing up and walking out of the room. And then I've got to figure out which half am I in? Am I the people that staying going to fail, or the people that are going to fail? So I looked around the room, and all the guys who were still sat down were all the really good soldiers. And some of the guys who were stood up and walking out were the ones who were maybe told halfway through, you might not pass. So I was like 99% sure, I was like, I'm in the right half, unless they made a mistake. And then they all left, and there was like less than half of us left in that room. So it'd been like chunked right down again. There's probably, I don't know, 20 people left or something out of like 250. And then we got the news that you guys are the hardcore element. Congratulations, you've passed. So and that was a huge moment for me. That was like, I knew then, I thought, see, even if something happens after this, I've now got that far that no matter what happens, I'm at the point now that no one else has actually done, which was a magical moment for me. But there was many times that I questioned myself, absolutely, loads of times, that I thought I might not be good enough or was going to fail. But one thing that didn't cross my mind was giving up. I honestly, hand on heart, not one time during the whole process did I ever consider throwing the towel in. And that's what a lot of people do. And I think that's the difference. They want guys that do not quit. Not the perfect guy, not the guy with all the skills already. Skills can be taught as long as you can adapt and assimilate new skills. That's what they want. They just want a really good basic platform to work from. Someone who's got all the basics dialed in and is willing to learn. Someone who's got humility. Someone who's willing to listen. So it's not about being the finished product. They create that. They mold you.
That's incredible. And I can't believe you just dropped that number that, you had 250 at one point, and now here you are 3 months in and there's 20 of you left. That must have been the coolest feeling in the world.
Really is, yeah. I can't remember the exact numbers it started, but it's 250 odd, I think, and as my memory serves me. But when you arrive there day one, I always remember the training officer on his opening address. Uh, we use these vehicles in the British Army. They've changed now, but back in the day, we used to use those old vehicles that were called a 4 tonner. Obviously, weighed 4 tons, and it was a big green vehicle, military people, like a troop carrier, and you can fit 18 people in the back of these troop carriers. And the training officer says there are 250 people in this room right now. He said, "Well, a massive hall, you know." There are 250 people in this room, he said, and by the end of this course, I will fit you all in the 1 4 tonner. And everyone's going gulp, you know, it's like, holy shit, there's a lot of people to drop here. And he was wrong because there was actually slightly more, there was a few more past than could fit in a 4 tonner. They never usually got more than 18. And I think we got like 23 or something past. That was like 23 got through. I remember then in his closing address, he said, at the beginning of this course, I said I would fit you all in the 1 4 tonner. I was wrong. So well done for proving me wrong. And, you know, because we'd sort of exceeded that number by about 5 people. First course in a long, long time, I think.
One of the things that I'm curious about is I often hear guys who are Army Rangers who go to Delta Force. They say when they're in the Rangers, they're getting yelled at constantly. Guys are in their face. You know, the instructors, it's F bomb this, F bomb that. But then when they go do Delta selection, they say one of the most unnerving parts of it is no one's yelling at you. No one's really telling you
Mm,
anything. You're
yeah.
you're on your own, and they say that that messes with a lot of guys' heads because they're not getting the instruction, they're not getting the feedback, no one's screaming in their face. It's like you're kind of on your own, and we'll let you know at the end of the day whether or not you're going home. SAS, are they yelling at you a lot in training, or is it more like that very professional? We're going to speak to you normally. We're not, this isn't a yelling fest.
Yeah, because you think of it, they're dealing with different types of soldiers. They're dealing with the most junior people on the course are going to have served at least 3 or 4 years in the military. They might have gotten the first rank, and you know that's like the junior element of selection. Usually, you've got like corporals and sergeants that are attending and beyond. And you've got a lot of officers as well, captains and sometimes even majors. You know, so they I don't think they feel the need to shouting and screaming and yelling at people isn't really, you're not trying to discipline people at that stage. You know, people should show up for that course already disciplined. They already make their bed in the morning. They already have done all the shit that you have to do when you join the military, basic military school. So that it doesn't really have a place, and I don't think it lands very well. It's a bit like anything in life. I don't think raising your voice in a situation is not really going to teach anyone, as well as good communication is, that they will actually listen to. An example would be, I remember when I was in the regiment and I kind of made a bit of a bit of a mistake. It was a social thing, so I'd been out and got drunk. I was on standby. I was on like 30-minute standby. You got your pager on your belt and stuff, and I was going through a little bit of a volatile stage, being young, having a massive ego, and you know, going downtown and thinking I was invincible. And I remember this one time where I went out and got drunk and came back, fell asleep in the taxi, got back to the base, couldn't wait, the taxi driver couldn't wake me up. I was blind drunk. A friend of mine was driving in the gate at the time. He lived next door to me in the same accommodation block, and he says, I'll take him to his bed. He says he's fine. So he paid my taxi. I had no money. I'd lost my money, lost my wallet. I was terrible. I mean, I was probably about 24 at the time, so I was only a young guy. But anyway, regardless, besides the point, I got really drunk and I had to be taken to my bed. And the police at the front gate, they're the guys who used to work the front gate for us, do the security. And I thought, yeah, they're not going to say anything. Next morning, they're phoning up my sergeant major. One of your guys came in last night. We know you're on standby. He was fucking drunk. He shouldn't be drunk because he's on standby. So they let him deal with it. It get kept in house. Nothing more would be said. So I had to deal with my sergeant major. So my sergeant major at the time was a lovely guy, really, really good guy. I got on really well with him, and we're very good friends to this day. And we laugh about it now. But I always remember I wanted to impress him. I liked him and he liked me, and I really wanted to be a good soldier for him. I wanted to be a good part of the squadron. I wanted to be a good a good team member. So I was kind of ashamed of myself the next day, and I was trying to hide the fact that it had happened. I didn't know that he knew. And at the end of the day, he says, "Come and see me in my office," and I knew he found out. And when I went into his office, I always remember that contrast of, if this would have been back in my battalion, it would have been it would have been a screaming match. You'd have been you'd have been thrown in jail. You'd have been charged straight away. But he didn't do that. He just sat me down and he said, he gave me a lot of compliments. He said, "You've done really well since you've been here, last couple of years. You're a good lad, good operator." He says, "But this social thing," he says, "you like your social time, don't you?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "I know it's a problem." He says, "Well," he goes, "I just say this." He said, I'm just really disappointed." And he kept a real solemn tone to his voice. And that cut through me like a knife. I felt really, really bad. And I was really disappointed with myself. And that cut through me like a razor blade. And I never forgot that. And the effect that had on me at that point was pivotal as well. Because after that, I was like, I need to fucking stop this. This is not a good habit. So I kind of behaved myself after that. And but I still, as far as like leadership goes, I always have that as a good memory and a good example of someone who really was good at leading men in the right way and could communicate. And his message really landed with me, and I thought, you know what, there's a lot to learn from that. And it was a great lesson, you know.
That's a great story, and really does go to the point you're making about how like screaming and yelling maybe is not the best way to communicate with people
Yeah,
when mistakes have been made. I saw a quote that off your Instagram that I want to read to you, and it's about essentially making it through SAS selection. I thought it found it really interesting. You said the reason that autonomy was so freely given is because every swing dick in that regiment had proven themselves by passing the hardest course of any military organization in the world. One, I think that's an incredible quote. Two, once you pass, is that the feeling you kind of have like, we did it? Like, we got through the toughest thing that they could throw at us. We are kind of invincible. We are like, we're the tip of the spear. I mean, how confident do you feel after getting through training like that?
yeah, it can, and that in itself can be a double-edged sword. For me, I had two sides of the sword really, because it's an amazing feeling, but it's a bit like, if you ever watch like a documentary on a famous rock star or an actor, someone famous who comes into success really young, and they have more money, more attention. There's some classic examples out there. Mike Tyson and Justin Bieber, they're a contrast in themselves, but people that are famous and rich very young. Now I wasn't rich and famous, but the significance of that title, and the that having that cat badge, and knowing that you've done that, it comes with a lot of significance. You feel, I'm actually, I had to pinch myself. I always remember going back to Scotland the first time after I passed, and one of my friends was like, "You're in the SAS." Like, he remembers watching Who Dares Wins with me when we were 10 years old. He's like, you've actually done this. He just, I can't believe it. And I kind of, it didn't really sink in for me. But then when it started to sink in, I thought, yeah, I am. I guess I am. But so it goes to your head, and it went to my head. And with that comes an ego, and it shouldn't, but it did, because I was very young, still a bit immature to deal with all that, and I guess I didn't really harness it very well. So there was a bit of a conflict, and I guess that's why the average age is late 20s to 30. So I was 22, very young, and I had all this shit went to my head, because people were telling me, this is amazing what you've done, and you're young, and you're the youngest guy to get in, apart from one other guy, but um, it all went to my head, and I guess it didn't really serve me. But going back to the quote on Instagram, I do believe it's definitely one of the hardest courses. I mean, I've not done all the other courses, so I couldn't. Let's face it, you would have to do them all, and then go, right, which one did I find the hardest? The fact of the matter is, some people find one thing harder than another. I've heard guys that have done the Mountain Leaders course say it was harder than SAS selection. It's a different type of hard. It's a physical thing. I guess everyone's different. They find different elements hard. I found the jungle hard, but I enjoyed it. So I didn't really find it as hard as maybe like the hills, like when you do aptitude on the first 4 weeks. I found that really physically challenging because it was carrying more weight. It was longer distances. The jungle was really interesting for me, and I really liked the jungle. So I didn't really relate to that as being hard. I just found it was challenging, of course, but I was so into it and I wanted to learn that it kind of took the attention off the difficulty. There were things like the beach run. So when you arrive in Brunei, one of the first things you do for acclimation training is you go out in the term is beach runs. So you go out in the beach runs, which are like, several miles in the blistering heat, first thing in the morning, and most guys struggle. Most guys are an absolute shit state, and I breezed it. I fucking breezed it because I could run like the wind. I was like, weigh like 130 pounds, and I could run like the wind. I wasn't very physically strong, but then that was my Achilles heel on selection. I was really small, and I remember we went out in this beach run one day, and there was one of the staff, a guy called Martin, and a big Irish guy, and he told us this story. So there was this story that he told us about a Scots guard from the Malaya campaign who was shot and trapped behind enemy lines, and he had to crawl something like 2 miles to get to safety, to get to home ground, and he seal crawled because he was shot in the legs, and he dragged his carcass back. Upper body, it was all upper body, and he basically dragged his legs. So they call them seal crawls, and he did this for some fair distance. Siri's gone off again. I need to disable this, I think, for future calls. So we were on this beach run and we had been absolutely smashed for miles. And what the DS do, they'll like smash you on the run and then they'll stop and then they'll tell you to pick someone. They'll pick a partner, find a partner, pick each other up. Right, okay, put someone over your shoulder, run over to that fucking cliff facing back again, and they get their breaths back so they can rest and it's not as hard on them. And then the last thing they got us to do was seal crawls. And he says, right, everyone line up, get in your belt buckle. He said he went into this story about this guy called Scott, this Scots guard. And he said he crawled for 2 miles. He said, so you're now going to seal crawl from me to one of the other staff. And he was like, it seemed like he was miles away. And I thought, holy shit. And I always remember this. Everyone was like cheating, everyone was, you're supposed to drag your dead weight legs. But I was looking around and people were like lifting their knees up and sort of like facilitating the move with their feet. But if you got caught, then that was a black mark. So I did it properly, and I did it until I could hardly hold myself up, and my legs were all like I'd cut all my knees, and all the skin was off my thighs and my knees, and I thought, shit, we're going into the jungle. Infection is going to be a risk and all that. So we got back to camp, and we were at breakfast, and I always remember he said to me, he says, Bruce, says you can run like the wind. He says, but your upper body's weak. And I was like, oh, I need to prove him wrong. So when I got to the squadron, first thing I did was get in the gym, lifting weights, and I got strong and bigger because I wanted to sort of, take that risk factor away because I thought I don't want to be the weak link in the squadron. But yeah, it's all mind games.
That's beyond fascinating. You had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the movie that the guy had been fired. Are there any examples you can talk about that are like an automatic green light? If you do this, whether it be in training or whatever it might be, you're gone. Like if you do this one thing, no questions asked, you're out of here.
Yeah, I mean, and it has happened to people. I've seen it happen to people. There was one guy who was on my selection course who did something on another course. He lost a piece of equipment, and it was an instant dismissal because it was something that was, it was a really, frowned upon mess up if you lost sensitive equipment on site of on a close target recce or something. And there were other people who like violence. If someone had done something, broken the law, and sometimes it's out of the regiment's hands. I mean, they will often back you up as much as they can because I guess it depends on the moral code. If someone has done something blatantly wrong, and in the regiment's eyes it is wrong, then they'll probably won't stand in the way of you being, returned to unit. But if it's something that just happens and you've maybe done something stupid, but it's not necessarily gross misconduct, you might have got into trouble for it. I did that a couple of times, got into trouble, and they will let you away with it because it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time to train an SAS soldier. They're not going to throw that away just by some rash, thing that someone's done wrong when they've been drunk. And it was very much a work hard, play hard type of lifestyle. There was a lot of guys, going out at the weekend and getting absolutely hammered because they had to. There was like a pressure valve, right? You had to release that shit, and people have got different ways of purging their system. And some guys, unfortunately, it was alcohol. It's not the best way, obviously, but it happened quite a lot. And so, yeah, it depends. It's a very unique situation, and I suppose it depends who's in charge, who's the command structure, if they like you, if you've messed up in the past, if it's a first offence, how bad the offence is. So it's a very uh, unique situation where they would treat every case as they found it. I guess doesn't happen often. Someone getting chucked out now.
Yeah, well, and that's why I asked, because you always hear different units kind of have different standards. Obviously, you can turn on the news and there's 1.5 million stories about different Navy SEALs, whatever it might be. Last question on kind of the training, and I'm fascinated by this. I know the audience is absolutely going to love every minute of this. The SAS is known for having some of the best shooters and gunfighters in the world. High speed CQB, like you said, the Iranian siege at the siege of the Iranian embassy. The takedown of that is legendary. They were amazing when they fought with America in Afghanistan, Iraq. For you personally, when you got to do like that, when you got the first introduction to that high speed level of shooting, did you find that came easy to you? Did you like it, or did that take a lot of reps to pick up?
For me, honestly, it came really naturally. I was quite fortunate. I suppose it's one of those things that uh, I guess it's one of those things that they do look for natural ability as well. So they're just things that you're going to be good at and things you're not going to be good at. But at the same time, you get someone who is, I've known lots of big guys that joined the regiment, like big, stocky guys who the beach runs were their worst nightmare. They would be like last on a beach run. But when are you going to ever run with your trainers and shorts on a beach in operations? You're never going to do it. Whereas if you're going to put a massive pack in your back and go around the mountains in Afghanistan, then the guy who's first on the beach run is probably going to be struggling with the Bergen and the kit less. It's like more than the mountain goat, And I've got clients now who are absolute mountain goats. I've got guys who I remember back in the regiment who you would look at them and go, "Geez, he's a big overweight guy." But you put a Bergen on the back, they will go, they will get donkey, they'll go forever. And it depends, I suppose, what the job is. It depends what fits. So you've got to be kind of good at a lot of things. And when it comes to things like instinctive shooting, I always remember when I was doing you do the live firing week in the jungle, at the jungle phase of selection, and you do advanced to contact. So it's like contact drills on the range with 4-man, 5-man teams. There's a lot of pressure on that, and that's actually an intense part of the course, and you do it for like a whole week, multiple times a day. You're on and off the ranges, and you're being absolutely scrutinized for everything you do. And the lead scout, so the front man, is like it's quite a pressurized job because he's going to see the enemy first. So when the targets pop up, he's got to give the call, and they test how quick you can see them, how quick you can shoot, how accurate your shooting is. But I remember what gave me a lot of what really boosted my confidence one day. We were on this range and we went for the debrief, and the DS used me as an example of how to perfectly be the lead scout. I was used as an example of a lead scout. He says as a lead scout, he says you have mastered it. You're absolutely perfect in your drills. So I was just very instinctive. So my eyesight was good. I was very instinctive with my drills, and I was accurate with the weapon system. So and not a lot of guys were. I mean, a lot of guys were, but not everyone was, should I say? But then you get someone who was not maybe such a good. Like I was a very good pistol shot, so I was always the demo guy on when we did demonstrations in the killing house for visitors and stuff for delegates. I was a pistol guy. I was a demo because my pistol shot was really accurate. I was just always a really good shot. I was always good with the gun. Even from a basic training recruit, I was always like a sharpshooter. And I think that's a natural ability in a lot of ways. Some people just aren't quite as good. But then I remember you say that the SAS are known for the sharpshooters and all that. I tell you something. I remember when we were on the special projects team, which is like the counter-terrorist with the UK responsibility, and we had a guy in exchange from Delta. So this Delta guy, a guy called Ken, came over, and he was an awesome guy. We quite a quiet, introverted guy, but really, really fucking good. And he came over and he joined our squadron, and we had we did he did the sniper course with us. So we were doing the counter terrorist sniper course before the special projects team became our remit, and we went down to the range, and you know you're obviously going to be competitive. If there's an American there, we all want to be better, right? And he fucking kicked our asses. Like he was better than all of us. And everyone was going, oh, this is embarrassing because he was really, really good. He was like a fucking amazing sharpshooter. This guy I mean, I've never seen him like it. He was next level good. And I mean, he was flying the flag for you guys, for your side of the pond, really high. And I always remember we were like sat there being a bit, acting a little bit humble because I thought, shit, the Yank is better at shooting than all of us. Even our best shots, he just wiped the floor. He's
Well,
brilliant.
I love hearing that. And we are I have a question that's going to touch on something similar. I don't want to spoil it, but that's a great tease to get into it. Let's talk about now kind of when the wars start. I know you said that you joined in 99 or started selection in 99. 9/11 happens obviously in 2001. So it's not terribly long after, but it's not immediate, right? When 9/11 happened, do you remember kind of what the perception or reception of it was within the British military? Did you guys know right away, like we're going to end up going somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. You just know that whatever the Americans do, we're not far behind. We were in the pockets of America, really. The Allies. So we knew. I mean, the day that happened, I remember actually that I was going to Scotland because I mean, I live in Hereford still. Yeah, where we're based, and where I'm from, my hometown's about like an 8-9 hour drive from here, north. So I planned to go home, and I remember the day that 9/11 happened. I was in town. I was having a coffee or something. I got in my car, and I was driving back to camp, and one of my friends called me, and he says, "Have you seen the TV?" I was like, "No, what's happening?" He says, "Fucking World Trade Center just been hit by two planes." And then by the time I got back to camp, the first tower had fallen. And then the second one, obviously, and the first thing we thought about was, right, we need to fucking get ready to someone's responsible. We need to get ready to deploy somewhere. But then I remember we were quite relaxed about it. My sergeant major was like, look, just continue your plans, have your pager. Because pagers back then, no one's got pagers these days, have they? But keep your pager handy and be responsive, but continue with your plans. So I still went to Scotland. We didn't get called away straight away. It wasn't as urgent as we might have thought, but we were standby squadron at the time. So it wasn't long after that we then ended up deploying. But we actually went on an exercise. We went on a training exercise to. We didn't deploy. In fact, there was guys deployed straight away, but it wasn't like the main squadrons. It wasn't that quick. It wasn't until like early the next year, 2002, we were actually on a training exercise in Oman, and we were a couple of weeks into this training exercise, and then we get told, right, you're off to Afghanistan. So we forward mounted from Oman to Afghanistan, and then we went to Bagram airfield when it was still a tented camp, and that was where we were based for some time, and we went straight on ops. We went straight on clearance ops after that. on arrival.
Well, I have something interesting to tell you, and maybe you know this already, maybe you don't, but it just jogged my memory. Do you know that the Delta team that almost got bin Laden in Tora Bora in, was that November, December 2001, right around,
Mhm.
they were in England when 9/11 happened. They were doing a training exercise with some Army Rangers on the belief that there was going to be some incident with elections in Montenegro, and they were preparing for
Ah,
possibly sending them in. And so the first Delta team was in England. They flew to Germany, and from Germany, and I don't think I'm saying anything that's not public, from Germany into Afghanistan. And the reason I know that is because one of the Rangers who later joined Delta was on this show. And he said, when we were in England doing that exercise, 9/11 happened. We woke up the next morning and all the Delta guys were gone. And we had no idea.
right, okay.
And they're like,
Yeah, I didn't know that. No.
yeah, the first Delta
Ah,
operators that hit the ground in Afghanistan were in England on a training exercise.
wow.
Little fun piece of
Who
history.
would who would have thought
Yeah, it's a
that?
pretty small world. So you say you get to Afghanistan. Is this your first time in a full-blown war zone?
Properly, yeah. I mean, we'd done like Bosnia and stuff, like little jobs over in Bosnia, but nothing to really write home about. But yeah, when it was Afghanistan, then that's when it felt very real. It was the first time that the butterflies kick in. You get a bit nervous, obviously. And as a young guy, still, I mean, I was what, I was 24, 24, 20, yeah, I was still like 24 years old then, so I was still pretty young. But that's all I wanted to do. I was like really like excited, like something. It's always a bit weird to say that because there's turmoil happening in the world. But when you're in the special forces as a young man, you join to go on ops. You join to do stuff that's cool and exciting, and that's how you think at that age. And so back then, I remember just thinking, "This is fucking mad. This is real. We're actually doing this, going on the ground." And this is the kind of the dark humor of the British Army, I guess. But I remember when we would go anywhere, we'd always set up the basics. So we'd put up the tents, and there'd always be a TV. Someone would get a TV going. There'd be all like the videotapes or DVDs, I think it was. And we just watch movies till we're told to do something. We'd prep our kit and then just sit and wait. And there's only so much preparation you can do before it's like, well, we're bored. So go to the gym, we drink some tea, we have a beer if we're allowed it, and we watch movies. And I always remember that we were getting the word to deploy, so we were deploying like the next day or the next night, late that night. We actually ended up flying in on helis to the mountains in the dead of night, which is quite unnerving. But we were sat there in this tent watching movies, and the film we were watching was Black Hawk Down. So we were sat there watching Black Hawk Down, and I thought we could have watched something a bit less on theme, because we're actually going in on helis tomorrow, and this kind of shit can happen to us. But it was like, well, we're ready. But I remember being on the back of the heli. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's faces cammed up, fully loaded. We had massive Bergens on our backs. We were going on foot. Half the squadron was on vehicles, half was on foot, and I was going into the mountains on the half of the squadron that was on foot. And I always remember for the first time, I would say that I got nervous. I think everyone you're excited, but you can't help but be nervous. And the thing I was most nervous about was landmines. I always remember that. When we were having our briefings and stuff. Because you trust everyone around you. You know that you're surrounded by some seriously capable dudes. So you feel really safe in that sense. And you trust yourself, you trust your colleagues, you trust your mates. But I remember thinking, fuck, it just takes one step to the left or right, and you're on a landmine. There was a lot of landmines that haven't been, cleared, lots and lots of them. So that was probably the biggest fear for a lot of people is like stepping on a landmine because we were told that was a heavy threat. So at the same time, it was a very exciting prospect. I was sat there kind of pinching myself because I thought, no, this is what I signed up for. Dead of night, dark as shit. Given like fucking, the -2 minutes call, you're going to land, and then you're on the ground then, and it's very real.
And is your objective when you first get in there? I think you said your job was clearing. So are you going through cave systems? What is
Yeah.
the goal at this point of the early stages of the war?
Well, there's just, I mean, someone has to check, right? So, I guess it's suspected Taliban hideout sites that you're clearing. So you're just, we did the same in Iraq, looking for WMD sites, which strangely enough, there was no WMDs there. That's another conversation altogether. Maybe more on the political side if you want to go down that route. But at the same time, we were just clearing potential sites where suspected Taliban may still be. But for the first part of that operation, it was very mundane and tiring and fucking exhausting because we did a lot of distance in the mountains and essentially found nothing. And it was a long way to be walking and a lot of weight to be carrying to just feel at some point that a little bit of disappointment that although one half of you is saying that we don't want to be running into trouble, at the same time, when you don't, it's like, well, that was a bit boring. So yeah, it is what it is, I suppose.
Did that Afghanistan deployment at any point, did the tempo of it eventually increase, or was it pretty mundane the whole way?
That when I was first time I was it was pretty mundane. If in all honesty, yeah, it was. It was a lot of walking, a lot of sitting around, a lot of checking places that nothing. It was quite mundane, if I'm being completely honest. So there was no massive crescendo moment where loads of things happened and lots to talk about. It was quite mundane, but at the same time, it was a great experience.
Well, yeah, obviously, like you said, it was your first time and kind of like the proper other
Yeah.
than Bosnia. I want to ask about Iraq because I did hear in your Team House interview you were talking about that a little bit. So, does the SAS, you specifically, are you guys in that opening stage in '03, or did you come in a little later? Like, what was your timeline when you showed up in Iraq?
Oh, we were there first. Yeah, we were there like we deployed 19th of March 2003 was our deployment day before mounted. Our forward mountain base was Jordan, so we went across the border from Jordan on the 19th of March. Slightly before. So we were on the ground before anybody really. Um, there was two squadrons, B squadron and D squadron went to Iraq.
And you're in
I
one of
was B
those two.
squadron, yeah.
So
I
you
was B
wow,
squadron,
so you're
yeah.
actually in the first SAS guys that crossed the border from Jordan into Iraq.
Yeah, that was a
That's
painful
wild.
that was a painful conversation really because and this is a bit of a piss take from the guys because we were the last ones to use the old Land Rovers. So before the new vehicles came in, we still used the old World War II Land Rovers. So they were fucking, you know, they could hardly stay on the road, these things. We actually had to take a mechanic with us. So we took this guy from the Remy, a guy called John, who ended up being a legend in his own lunchtime in the Remy because he was like behind enemy lines with a Sabre squadron. First time it had ever happened. But we needed he was really worth his weight in gold because he was a vehicle mechanic that if he hadn't been there, we'd have been fucked. We really would have been because he kept the vehicles going. All these and you think that the British SAS. Don't get me wrong, they looked really cool in pictures. They looked amazing. They're really really cool, but so unreliable. So we got the orders, and my vehicle was Bravo 80, and Bravo 80 was first to cross the border. So we're blowing a hole in this bun line. We're clearing anything that might have been there at the time, any resistance that might have been there, checkpoints or whatever. We were clearing the path, and our vehicle was going to be the first vehicle to cross. So I was like, we're going to be the first vehicle into Iraq. How cool is that, right? And when we were just about to cross the border, the fucking vehicle broke down and we had to get the mechanic. We actually ended up being last to cross the border and we were being towed by the next vehicle. And we never lived that down because we were gloating about it, saying we were going to be first to cross the border, first in, and all that, and then it ended up we were dead last. So it was painful, and that was the kind of flavour of things really to start with. But we kept going, and the vehicles were kept going, but it wasn't an ideal situation. But again, this is one of those things.
how would you describe the resistance that you faced in Iraq? And I'll preface it kind of with this. I've heard from a lot of guys in the interview series that essentially a lot of Iraqi soldiers didn't really want to fight. Like
Nah.
they took one look at an American, British, the Allied power. They saw a couple guys get destroyed, and they're like, "This is not for us." And they pretty much just put their guns down and went home. For
Yeah, I
you,
mean it's a shame, really. It's a shame when you think about that. They're people, they are people. They're not terrorists. They're soldiers in all conscripts, and none of them want to be there. These people are just people with families, and they have to be there because they're under a regime, and they have no choice in the matter. So yeah, it's a bit like the Gulf War One. You know what happened there when they all just completely surrendered as soon as it started. You've got to feel for these people, So um, it's a really weird mindset with that one, because that's something that I thought about a lot years after, even still today. When you're ordered to go somewhere to to do a job in a foreign country, and the resistance isn't actually resistance, but you do have resistance. We met resistance. There were pockets of resistance who were resistant, but probably because they just felt they had to be, and some of them probably wanted to be, but the majority probably didn't want to be there. And so it's changed days now, because after that point where the regime fell, and then all these other groups, then these other militant groups showed up, and it was then terrorism, essentially. When you're dealing with extremists, terrorists, these are people who are very conditioned, very motivated, very driven by their culture, by their overarching goal, and they're very passionate about what they're fighting for. So you've got a different beast there. You've got resistance. You've got essentially like an enemy, and you'll have a fight. They want to kill you, but back in the first stages of the Iraq War, it's not you've not got that. You don't have terrorism. You have essentially Saddam Hussein's then army, who aren't in it because they want to be there.
right?
So you have to feel for these people, the people of Iraq, because I worked in Iraq after leaving the regiment. And some of the nicest people you'd ever meet are Iraqis. The good people. So yeah, it's a shame. But as far as the resistance goes, yeah, light resistance, pockets of small resistance, but nothing huge.
Number one, I agree with your assessment there, and I think people forget that. I think a lot of people forget that these are people who have children, they have
Yeah,
wives, and there is, and I think the important thing, the point you're making, is there's a big difference between a uniformed soldier of the Iraqi army and, for
huge.
example, a member of ISIS.
Yeah.
One's a professional soldier who
Hmm.
is not trying to blow himself up for some asinine reason. And the other one will have no problem killing every innocent person around him if he gets the opportunity. And it's
Huge.
important people understand those are not the same
Mm.
things.
Not the same. And we're indoctrinated. I mean, when you're in the military, I mean, when you do basic training, you're taught to kill the enemy, kill or capture the enemy. So the word enemy is drilled in. You're conditioned to believe that these people are your enemy. And let's face it, when it all comes down to it, it's all politics. You're there because you're told to be there, because the army's told to be there. You're there to do your job, right? And everyone else is. So we're the enemy to them. When it's uniformed soldiers, we are the enemy, because they're fighting for whatever their regime believes is right, and vice versa. So there is a huge difference. You can have empathy for a fellow soldier, but not with extreme terrorism. That's just not evil, fucking satanic sort of terrorist. That's a different case altogether. So there
Absolutely.
is huge contrast.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing that out. Now, this was a question that you kind of teased a little earlier with the sniper story, which I know the audience will get a kick out of. In your team house interview, I heard you say that I think Delta was they were living right next to you guys at one point in
Yeah.
Iraq. Is that correct?
Hmm.
So, what is the number one? Did you do any like cross hits with them? Did you guys work together a lot, or were you kind of on your own and they were on their own?
No, we worked co-located with them for a reason as well. We'd be working together as well. So again, it depends on the size of the target, and sometimes like there were multiple target nights as well. So you could go through a night and hit three targets. If it was one big target, then obviously there was only a squadron of us over there at any one time. So you might need everyone. So we would work together as a coalition. So as a joint special forces group, Delta would have, all you're doing is making the team bigger because everyone's a professional special forces soldier. So we would essentially have like Delta and T2 SAS, working together for a bigger target. But you would then have like the US Rangers doing like the cordons and the outer cordon work to then, make sure that we could be doing the job that we were responsible for. So again, it depends on the size of the target. They had their targets, we had our targets, but if there was a larger target that required a bigger team, then that's when you collaborate.
I know that every Delta guy I've ever interviewed has nothing but amazing things to say about the SAS. I know they hold
Yeah,
SAS operators in insanely high regard. As a as
yeah.
a as an SAS veteran, what would you say the outlook is reversed? How do SAS guys view dudes who are in Delta Force, which is America's tier one tip of the
Mm.
spear direct action unit?
Oh, brilliant, really. I mean, every bit is good, really. They just get better equipment, get better kit than us. But there's some amazing soldiers in Delta, obviously, and we're both very mutually respectful. There is no competitiveness in that sense, saying one's better than the other, because we work together. They come over and exchange with us, and we send guys over there for 6 months, 12 months. So there's a lot of mutual respect with us in Delta. It's like the US equivalent, really.
Yeah, it is. And like I
Yeah.
said, they love the SAS. They say great things about
Mm.
the SBS. I mean, it does seem like everyone at that tier one level, like there is so much mutual respect because you guys have been through
Absolutely.
so the
Yeah.
training, the combat. Um, Eventually, obviously, you leave, life moves on. And I have a couple questions here about that and kind of perception. But number one, by the time you got out, now you've been out for a long time, you can look back at those memories. Do you miss it at all? Do you miss being a member of the SAS?
I don't regret leaving. There was times when I did miss it, especially not long after I had left. I remember I met with the rest of the squadron one time. I got invited to a squadron get together, and everyone was drinking. And the sergeant major at the time, he said to me, "Look, there's always an open door there if you want to come back." And it was like a dangle the carrot moment. Do you want to come back in? And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted. You know, I really was, and I guess it's one of the things I did struggle with when I left, probably for a couple of years, probably a few years, is I really missed the guys. I missed the camaraderie. I missed the structure. I missed just the day to day, kind of being paid to have fun and be with your mates and do the job that you loved. But at the same time, your life is in their pocket, really. You don't have any autonomy with your life. And I guess that's one of the reasons I got out is because I wanted to have more control over what I did. So yeah, I did miss it in some ways, but I didn't regret leaving. I always knew it was the right thing to do leaving, so I didn't have any regrets as such. But yeah, I did miss it, and yeah, there's still things that when I talk about, I get fired up and think that was cool. But I mean, I'm happy with my decisions. I know I made the right decision when I did. But yeah.
When it comes to kind of how the military over there is viewed by the general public, obviously here in America, the military is a huge deal. We have like parades, being a veteran is a really big deal. People are very proud of it. Is it the same way over there across the pond where people kind of put the military kind of on that pedestal, maybe to a degree, or is it not as part of maybe the mainstream culture in society like it is here in America?
I don't think it's the same. No, I think this is it's much more championed over in the States. It's not as much over here. They have people are respectful of the military, of course, but not to the same degree. as being a veteran is not such a thing over here. I remember the first time, I think I was still serving at the time. Maybe I had left. I think I might have left, but I remember going to Disney World, and one of the shows over there, before the show started, they said we want to do a stand up for all our veterans, and it was like kind of weird because I thought, fuck, this would never happen in the UK. No one gives a shit. But they made a huge thing, and you go in there if you got an ID card, you get into places for free and stuff. They really look after the veterans. And over here, there are some places that do like military discount, or they'll have a pro veteran sort of thing going on. But as a comparison, nah, not on the same level. Really isn't. I don't believe.
That's fascinating. And you're not the first person. The guy I interviewed from Canada had a very, very, very similar response to that as well. Just a few more questions. You got time for a few more questions?
Obviously, yeah, I've got plenty of time. Yeah.
Obviously there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, there's all that wild stuff. For you as someone who lives over there, do you worry about like the capabilities of your military moving forward? Do you worry it's maybe too small? Should it get bigger? Like, what's your opinion as someone who served at the tip of it, where you think the UK military is moving forward?
I think we're fucked. If we've got to go to war, we're fucked. We are fucked as a nation because I mean, how much can like the SAS, for example, it's a very small unit in itself. You've got a highly motivated bunch of guys in the hundreds. I'm talking like a couple of hundred. And then you got the rest of the British Army, which is scaled back, which probably isn't what it was. And then you've got the rest of the population who would be the next generation to join the military, which isn't the same as generations gone by. Things have changed. People have changed. Social media plays a huge influence in young people's lives these days. The conditioning's all different. So people, the generational factor is massive here. So we would really, I think it would be a real struggle if we were to get summoned to form a military. I wouldn't have much confidence in that, but at the same time, I don't have any confidence in the government. I don't trust any of our politicians. I think they're all corrupt as fuck. Hate them all, and honestly, that's me being really blasé about that. But I wouldn't want my son to join the army now. That's the last thing I'd want him to do. I don't want my son to follow in my footsteps. I did all that shit because I didn't really have many options, hoping that he's going to have way more than I did, and I would protect him against that because I don't trust the people. I don't trust the powers that be. Is the fact of the matter. So that's where I'm sat at the moment with that. I'm very, very passionate about that. Why would we want? Why would anyone want to go and fight for a country that can't look after its own?
I love
No
this.
one's going to want to do that.
I'm so happy you brought this up because you have opened a can I would love to unpack with you. Number one, is a combat veteran. One of the things that drives me crazy, and I was never in the military whatsoever, but I'll turn on the news and you'll see politicians or talking heads on the TV, and they talk about sending young American men to just every conflict that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
Let's send 100,000 troops to Ukraine. Let's send them wherever. I think that's insane to talk about that so casually, as if those aren't people's kids. You're an actual combat veteran. When you hear politicians or the media, they just talk about these lies like they're numbers on a paper. What do you say to those people?
There's a Scottish music artist called Jerry Cinnamon, right, who I absolutely love. And he's very much into his politics, and he's very anti-establishment. He's a Scottish guy. And there's one of his songs called War TV. And the lyrics, if it serves me right, he's talking about politicians. He says, they're all quick to make war, but they won't send their sons. Shout the odds like a gangster, but they won't hold a gun. Right. And those lyrics really etched in my mind. And it's true, that epitomizes in a couple of sentences the nature of the beast as far as the politicians from both sides, from all sides. But they're very quick to say, yeah, we'll send troops. It's like they're not like fucking disposable, little minions that don't mean anything because they don't have families. You're talking about people, and then they're okay because they can sit there and say this because they're sat there in their ivory tower they're protected. They're always going to be okay, but they don't give a shit about anyone else but themselves. And they're the ones that are profiting from all this shit in the first place. Because it's the reasons behind why we go to war. This is a real fucking huge subject. But I mean, when you think about, proud to fight for your country, there was a time where you could probably say that a long time ago. But nowadays, even when I went to Iraq, I have bad feelings about even being in Iraq. Why did we go to Iraq? Why were people killed in Iraq? Because of the regime that was happening there, because of Saddam Hussein was such a bad person, or was it because they wanted to orchestrate something that was going to make loads of fucking money for the right people? Come on, fucking,
I,
it's a joke.
I think one of the things people have to get, I think the way we frame war is broken. And if I was the president of the United States and I felt there was a threat so grave, like World War II, where we don't have a choice, we have to fight. It is a
Yeah.
matter of our existence. I would look people straight in the eyes and say, look, we either do this or we don't. If we don't do this, this country might not exist. And let's understand the cost. We're going to destroy an entire generation of young men. People are going to get killed. They're going to get maimed. There'll be mental health problems. Families will be destroyed. But that's a price we feel is worth it in this situation. That's not how they talk about it. It's, we're going to go over there. We'll punch them in the face. Everything will be fine. And we'll come back here. It'll be no big deal. It never works like that, ever.
It doesn't.
And I agree with you 100%. Just the way these politicians, now I'm getting fired up. It's absolutely crazy. You talked about social media and how it's broken this generation. I would really love to talk to you about that because I agree with you 100%. Why do you say that social media has been such an issue?
It's people are becoming mentally obese. It's like eating too much sugar. Only difference is it's the visual of the dopamine. It's the dopamine that they're getting from the visual aspect rather than from eating junk food. But I mean, they're doing both. People are doing both these days. But I mean, I'm on my phone too. I spend too much time on my phone, and I'm quite disciplined with stuff. I've got quite a lot of self-discipline, and it's one of the things that I still think, shit, there I go again. I just lost 20 minutes of my day because I've been looking at shit on social media. So I've got to like check myself in. With these kids, it's like it's normal because we grew up without mobile phones. I mean, I'm not sure how old you are, but I mean, I'll be 47 this year, and I didn't have my first mobile phone until I was in my 20s. First smartphone when I was in my 30s. So it wasn't normal, and but these kids have grown up with this. It's been normal to them from a very young age, and so when it's normal, that is your condition because everyone's got their own condition, and wherever we are at any point of our lives right now, we've got a point of right now in time, and we have a set conditioning depending on what we've experienced for our whole lives. So if their experience has been through a phone or an iPad, that's the way their brain's conditioned. And so the dopamine, the chemicals in your brain and the neurotransmitters and everything that's fired together and then wired together eventually, the dopamine that they get from picking their phone up and checking Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok, whatever shit they look at, um, they'll subconsciously constantly look for that same dopamine hit. So that it's like anything, it's a battle between the conscious and the unconscious mind. So unconscious, they're doing all this stuff completely unconsciously. I mean, even I find myself sometimes going, "Oh, there's Instagram," and then I'll open Facebook, and then I'll go back to Instagram and remember that I've just been into Instagram because it's the same shit I'm looking at, and go, "I was in there like literally 15 seconds ago. Why am I checking it again?" But I catch myself. They don't. They're just going on it and scroll. It's just like reels, 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 and it's like a fucking it's like a surgical attachment that they're constantly seeking the dopamine.
So
And that's it.
you said you have one son. How many kids you got?
I've got two kids, one son, one daughter. My daughter's 19, my son's 8.
Okay. So your son's 8. Are you going to let him have a smartphone at any point? Like, when would you be okay with him getting on a smartphone and getting on the internet?
Not for a while. I mean, I personally wouldn't want him to have one, but let's face it, they fall behind if they don't have this stuff. They will fall behind potentially. But is that just a bad belief? Because why do they need it? Why do they need a smartphone? When you think about when you think about the reasons behind why some people would say that. I've just said it, but do I really believe that? Because what would be the reason that a child would need a smartphone? And the number one reason is because people think it all relates back to money. We're conditioned to we're conditioned to think about money all the time. So, oh, if you don't give them a smartphone, they won't be able to learn stuff. So therefore, when they're older, they won't be able to get a job or they won't be able to start a business. You know, if they can get really good with TikTok, they can make millions of pounds or dollars on from their phone. Kids are doing it. But are they happy? Are they genuinely happy? You know, I think we've become so fucking hardwired to this belief that everything has to be through social media. Everything has to involve technology. But we're forgetting the basic stuff in life that matters more than any of that shit, which is nature, our health, introspection, knowing ourselves. Because what's happening now is, and this is across the board, kids and adults, is that one of the things that I tend to work on with my clients, and I've even gone through this myself, and I'll probably always go through it, but we should be on a constant quest to know ourselves as well as possible. And most people in the human race do not know themselves. They spend a lifetime trying to figure themselves out, trying to figure out why they procrastinate, why they do shit that they know is sabotaging their results. And they're in this constant cycle, this loop, you know, antidepressants or alcohol or whatever other shit they can throw down their necks. And it's a belief system, it's the belief systems that are screwed. Because I've just demonstrated that a minute ago. You know, my son, when would he have a smartphone? Well, maybe when he's a teenager, when he's 13, which is 5 years from now. Will he want one before that? Probably, but I don't want to give him a smartphone. He's got an iPad, but he's thankfully he's not one of those kids that's obsessed with going on it all the time. He'll actually want to kick a football or play snooker or something like that. So he likes to do practical stuff, thankfully. But I suppose there's only so much you can hold them back from having something like technology. And if you do hold them back, they're going to find a way to get it anyway. It's unfortunately the way the world is right now, and it's quite frightening.
And I think well, number one, I agree with you 100% across the board. I think social media
Mm.
technology is had consequences that maybe we could see coming, but we just didn't pay attention to. But they're here now. I mean, there's no getting out of it. I mean, this is
Nah.
the way it is. And I think one of the things, and I'll be curious to get your opinion on this, I think it is so damaging for maybe kids who are that 13 to 16-year-old age, especially young women. They get on Instagram and they see all this poison, essentially, of how they should behave, how they should
Mm.
look, what they should post to get attention from other people. That is injecting poison into a brain that is not developed enough to know how to reject it. And it's like I see people I grew up with posting online. I know that stuff's not real. I grew up with them. It's all an
Yeah.
act, but they do it because they're so desperate. Like you said, the dopamine hits. So, Lindsay, what do we do? Like, how do we just take people's phones from them? Like, do we just cut the internet
Nah,
access? What do we do?
you can't, but it's like anything else. I love chocolate. Chocolate can make you really fucking fat if you eat too much of it, but you can still enjoy it. I don't personally drink alcohol anymore, but I did up until last year. And when I drank alcohol till that point, it was one of those, I was always one of those guys who maybe on a Sunday I might have one or two beers. I didn't get drunk. 10 years ago, I did get drunk. So it's kind of been a progression for me in that sense. But that was a choice. And that's the thing. We all have a choice. And it's about influence. It's about it's for everyone's got a responsibility as a parent, as a friend, as a husband, wife. We all have our own responsibility. We all make our own decisions. And obviously, our surroundings, our environments dictates how we may become. But at the same time, you still have the choice to not become like the next person if it's not going to be good influence for you. So it really does come down to personal choice. You can't force someone to stop something. You can't, you know, abstain someone from technology or social media because if the choice or the desire isn't within them, then it's not going to be there until they face enough pain to do something about it. And this is the other thing. Some people need to go into a very deep, dark place before they will realize that, they need to change. This is something I deal with a lot as well with clients. And I always think, in fact, I had a good conversation with a friend of mine the other day. This kind of relates, so I'll try and link it up. A very good friend of mine, we met the other day for lunch. We see each other probably once a month. We actually were in the same squadron, same troop. We left at the same time. We got a job together, so we're really good friends. And I'm off to so I went to Ecuador last year, did a plant medicine retreat. Very awake to what's going on, and I'm going through my own journey of essentially like a spiritual path of awakening myself, um, which has changed my life in the best way possible because it's made me get to know myself a lot better. And I'm a baby in this journey. I'm just started on the path, and then I've got a lot to learn, and it's given me a lot of sort of zest for life moving forward. But I'm going back to Ecuador in June to do a vision quest, which is 4 days, 4 nights, complete abstinence, no water, no food, no shelter, on the mountain, on my own for 4 days, 4 nights, just looking inwards, right? So my friend who I was having lunch with the other day, he said, in July, I'm going to do a cycle, like a transcontinental cycle. I think it's a couple of thousand miles. It's like really long. And to me, that's like it's hardcore. And this guy's very successful in his life. So he's financially, free. He's done well for himself. And he said, you know what? He says, you're doing your vision quest. He says, this is my vision quest. And I says, why are you doing it? And he says, do you know why I'm doing it? He says, I was fucking sick of being so comfortable. He says, I was comfortable to the point where I was, getting down because I didn't have any uncertainty. So much certainty with finances and things, but you get bored. You sometimes need that. You need pain, and I'm not in a sadist way, not in a David Goggins type way, but not just constantly chasing pain. But you need an element of uncertainty. It's one of the basic human needs. You need variety and uncertainty. And if you get too much certainty, you get really bored. If you get too much uncertainty, you're just a bag of nerves. But you do need to sometimes push yourself into a place where you feel alive again. Because they say that when you're at fucking all-time low, or you know, you're going to die, that's when you feel most alive, or that's where you want to be alive. We've all heard stories of that. I remember hearing one story. I watched a thing on TV ages ago about a guy who decided to take his own life, and he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And as he jumped off, he had, in his mind, he changed his mind, but it was too late. But he miraculously survived, and it changed his life. He came through addiction, depression. I mean, obviously he was at an all-time low, but he realized when he actually jumped that he fucking made a mistake, and he actually wanted to live more than ever. And that was his turning point. Just luckily he survived. And I've heard so many stories about people in similar positions where they have to reach rock bottom. The link to this story and the point I'm trying to make is at some point, I think, and this has to be not just on an individual level, I think it has to be on mass, is that when you look at the big picture of this, as on a global scale, most of the world is on a very fucking low vibration. The news, the media, politicians, there's a lot of corruption. It's a very low vibrational pool that a lot of people are on, whether it be eating too much shit, taking drugs, drinking too much alcohol, watching the news, not having money, wars, corruption. It's mass low vibrational fucking frequency. And I think, and if you look into this, that we're coming into another age. It might not be for a long, long time, but eventually it will have to come into another age where that has to pick up and it has to change. And I think that, you know, um, we all have a responsibility to not only be the best people we can ourselves, but influence as many people as we can in the best way possible. Just be good human beings and spread good messages, to spread like love and light essentially, rather than shit and doom. Because if you can influence one person, should I say, and they can influence one person, and that sort of starts to have that sort of that branch out effect, that what's the word I'm looking for? It has like
Ripple
a
effect.
ripple effect. Yeah, that's exactly the word I was looking for. It has a ripple effect, and I think eventually it will win. But at the moment, there's such a low vibrational pool on the planet that as a mass consciousness, we have to eventually change. So when I'm thinking about my own purpose, what drives me is that if I can be the best person that I possibly can be by just trying to be a really good human being, a good father, a good potential partner, a good man, a good human, and I can try and influence others and help people try to live a better life for themselves and their families, and then other people are doing what I'm doing, and then collectively we all make a little bit of a difference, whatever we're doing in life. That's what has to make the effect. We have to have faith in the fact that that's going to eventually be the overriding factor. Then we might be in a better place. But I think that in the grand scheme of things have to get pretty shit before they get better. So when you think about the individual who has to go through their own dark shit to then come out of it and see the light and go, I want to change, it has to happen en masse as well eventually. Might not be in our lifetimes, but it will happen at some stage.
I love everything about that story. I mean, with your friend, what you're going through, 4 days without food and water. That is, I'd never even heard something about like that before. You'll have to
Yeah.
let us know how it goes. Could you tell the audience if they've watched this, they've stuck around, they're very interested in learning more about you. Where can they find you, whether it be on Instagram or a website? Like, where can they find more about Lindsay Bruce?
I mean, I don't have a website yet. It's one of those things I've been kind of doing my own procrastination on, but I've never really needed one to this point. So I am getting my website will be themodernwarriorproject.com. But my Instagram handle is at the Lindsay Bruce. So just like the followed by my name. And Facebook as well, just my name. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, that type of thing. But Instagram's probably the most sort of popular channel for me on socials. Yeah. So, and I've got a free Facebook group that people can join as well, the Modern Warrior Project. So people can catch me there.
Well, Lindsay, this has exceeded all expectations. We went from talking about you getting into the
I know, yeah.
SAS to talking about politics and much more. So I'd like to thank you very
Yeah.
much. And maybe in a year or so, we come back and we talk about how your vision quest went and,
I,
where you're
I would
doing
love
then.
that. Yeah. I would absolutely love that. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely.